Generally, it's ki tetzei lamilchama, when you go out to war, good Shabbos. When you go out to war, it's really a cloud cuckoo land kind of war. And of course, some critics have said, oh, they were so barbaric in ancient times. They would go out with their swords and their spears and so on. And I suppose I can agree. It's much more civilized to go out with F-35 bombers and tanks and, nuclear bombs. That will certainly correct the problem very quickly. But as I say, it's not really a realistic sort of war, because what they're talking about here, and obviously every war was accompanied by a certain degree of rape and pillage. And what we're focusing on here specifically is when the Israelites storm over the Jordan and conquer the Promised Land, although we know that didn't really happen. It took place over a period of years, not centuries, I would say. But they filtered over, I like to say, and one day the Canaanites were looking out the living room window and they said, oh my God, the Jews are here, there goes the neighborhood, and all the Canaanites disappeared. Although it took a certain amount of time for them to do that too. Hello, good Shabbos, Leland, how are you? Good to see you. Okay. Well, but the whole point here is that when you go out to war and you go into the enemy's town or the enemy's camp and you see a beautiful woman, well, in ancient times they certainly knew what to do. You have that famous painting, The Rape of the Sabine Women, and that was really just a bunch of fellows from one tribe trying to find wives. They didn't have mayhem in their mind. But in this instance, if you see a beautiful woman, you may take her captive, and you're not allowed to have your way with her. It's right in the Torah. It's amazing. Mark Twain was right when he said, I don't care if they censor my work as long as they leave Bibles around where any child can get a hold of them. If you see this beautiful woman and you are attracted to her, I don't know if she's attracted to you, but that doesn't really matter, because frankly the Torah, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, these are all boys' clubs invented by and for boys, and Jewish feminism didn't really get started until about 1969. But the woman comes home with you. You don't lay a hand on her. She is not allowed to put on makeup. She's not allowed to dress her hair. She's not allowed to... Oh, she has to clip her nails very short, because apparently long nails then as now were a very attractive sort of thing. And she lives with you for a month. And if you decide to marry her, you may go ahead and marry her. But then, lo and behold, if in the course of marrying her you discover you no longer love her, you cannot sell her into slavery because you have humbled her. You've got to give her a substantial bag of money and send her on her way. Any thoughts? Do you think we should bring that back?
So what's changed?
Well, I think a lot of things have changed.
No, we still have that going on.
Really?
Bag
It's
of
amazing.
money.
Wrong neighborhood for me.
Divorce and pay them off.
This doesn't really appeal. The only thing I'll say, and I'm not in favor of it, is that you have to keep in mind they didn't have romantic love in those days. You didn't have Romeo and Juliet, you didn't have Abelard and Eloise. That wasn't invented until the French and Italians did it around the 15th century, and they started writing poetry, and then the English picked up on it, Sir Philip Sidney, Sir Thomas Wyatt, and so on. In those days, in ancient times, when you married, you had one purpose in mind, and that was to grow the tribe. Because, after all, the Israelites were not the biggest people on the block, then as now, and reproduction was a concern in those days as well. Although there was a certain amount of racism that crept in. I might as well throw this in now. You're not allowed to marry a Moabite, an Ammonite, an Edomite, or an Egyptian. Okay, why can't you marry a Moabite? Because they seduced the Israelites at the cult of Baal Peor. Frankly, my feeling is you can't seduce anyone who isn't interested in at least meeting you halfway and being seduced. So I don't think you should blame the Moabites for that. But both the Moabites and the Ammonites, if you recall, way back in Genesis, you have that instance of Lot, after he escapes from Sodom and Gomorrah, and he and his two wives, his two daughters, are living in a cave, and they feel that in order to, well, they figure they're the last people on earth, so they commit incest in order to ensure the continuation of the Israelite tribe. And I know it's kind of icky, but you have a lot of that stuff in Genesis. They never taught us that in Hebrew school, though. I remember we used to use this charming little Chumash, this little Pentateuch, called Magil's Linear Hebrew Bible. And it was invented by a fellow named Joseph Magil in the late 19th century, as a matter of fact, which is where several of my students think I come from. But they explained it, again, line by line. They gave you a very good, what they called a linear translation. You've got your Hebrew, you've got your English. You've got your Hebrew, you've got your English, and so on. But when it got to the racier parts of Scripture, all of a sudden, all you had was the Hebrew. And you'd raise your hand and say, Rabbi Yarmark, why can't we read this part? It doesn't matter, that's not going to be on the final. Okay. You can fool little kids, it's not a problem. Okay. All right, so we've got the beautiful captive. The inheritance rights of the firstborn. Now, I don't think this is a problem for anyone here, but on the off chance that you decide to be polygamous. Anybody polygamous? Okay. Oh, thank you, Jason. Very good. Actually, you should be aware that in the year 1000, was that a good year for the Jews?
No.
No, pretty bad. Not as bad as 1200. No, by the time you get to 1100, it's the Crusades, and that's pretty rough. Okay, but in the year 1000, Rabbeinu Gershom, our Rabbi Gershom, whom I knew personally, he's called Ma'or HaGolah, he's called the Light of the Exile, and he makes a takana, or as we used to call it in yeshiva, takana, which is a rabbinical ruling applicable only for a given period of time, that Ashkenazic Jews may no longer be polygamous. And the Sephardic Jews were allowed to be polygamous. The Mizrahi Jews from the Arab lands, they were allowed to be polygamous too. But I think you should know we've been monogamous ever since, except for one thing. Rabbeinu Gershom's takana expired. So all bets are off, and go forth, and, well, whatever. But in this instance, I'm glad we have directions for polygamy in Scripture, because what happens is, let's say you've got two wives. It says right this way in the Chumash. If you've got two wives, and you love one, ha'ahuva v'ha'snuah, the one who is loved and the one who is despised. And I'm thinking, what exactly happened at the betrothal that you decided to marry someone you despise? But of course there's a competition between the wives. We know, for example, in Jacob's case, he was a very busy man. He had Rachel and Leah, and he had two concubines, Bilhah and Zilpah. So he was manufacturing tribes like nobody's business. But in this instance, these are nameless people, okay? Husband, two wives, one loved, one hated. And the hated one gives birth to the Bechor, the firstborn. Any firstborn here? Okay, very good. Well, what would you do? Are you allowed to cheat the firstborn out of his inheritance just because his mother is not your favorite? No, you are not, as a matter of fact. Although we find in the Torah, it's frequently, in the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, it's frequently not the Bechor. It's not what they call primogeniture. It's ultimogeniture. It's the baby of the family who gets the goods. For example, I mean, whom does God love? Let's see. Does Cain and Abel, Adam and Eve give birth to Cain and Abel? Who is the favorite? Abel, the baby, because he's a shepherd, and we come from shepherding folk. I don't think we've shepherded in a few thousand years, but it's still on the books. Okay, who else? Okay, the Moses family. You've got Miriam, the eldest. You've got Aaron, the middle child, which tells us a lot about his character. That's why he was a diplomat. You've got Moses, the baby. Who's the favorite? Moses, right. David has 6 brothers, 12 brothers, depends on which story you read, and he's the favorite. Again, he's the baby. So it goes, and so it goes. But in this instance, they say, do not slight the firstborn. You should give him a double share of the inheritance. Okay. Well, now, any heretics here? In Judaism, it's very hard to be a heretic. You really have to work at it. You have to have at least a PhD in Judaism to be a heretic. Otherwise, you're just an Am Haaretz, an ignoramus. But what happens here is that we have the most famous heretic of Jewish history, and you could say history because we can prove this guy lived, Elisha ben Avuya. Elisha ben Avuya is, if you read As a Driven Leaf by Rabbi Milton Steinberg, it's not bad. The language is a little bit too fruity, but otherwise it's really... So he was certainly no slouch in the intellectual department, but he had his doubts about Judaism, and so he becomes interested in Greek philosophy. The rabbis despised the Greeks from the time that Alexander the Great came riding up from Egypt and saying, "Hi, I'll be your king, I'm going to conquer you, and go fry some latkes and get a menorah." Okay, Elisha ben Avuya, what happens to him, and there's a famous statement, okay, that 4 rabbis entered into Pardes. They entered into paradise. It doesn't mean paradise. It means they went into these highly esoteric interpretations of the Torah. Pardes, paradise stands for pshat, the simple meaning of the text. Remez, the hinted at meaning of the text, meaning that if you're talking creation, the first part, somebody's going to be using that same verb later on in the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible. Drash is how rabbis make their living. A drash is a homily. A drash is a story, a legend, an interpretation. And finally, there's sod, which means secret, and that is Kabbalah. Okay? Because Kabbalah, if you want to be a heretic, Kabbalah is the place to be. Well, Elisha ben Avuya, and what happens to the 4 rabbis who went into paradise? It was Ben Azai, Ben Zoma, Elisha ben Avuya, and Rabbi Akiva. Okay? Ben Azai interpreted the Bible in forbidden ways, and he committed suicide. Ben Zoma, same thing, only he went crazy. He became insane. And Elisha ben Avuya became a heretic. He became an apikoros, which is a whole interpretation by itself. And finally, only Rabbi Akiva went in complete and left complete. Rabbi Akiva is probably the greatest of the Talmud Rebbe's. You could probably argue that, but even so. Well, Elisha ben Avuya is riding his horse, his donkey, and he's watching a little peasant boy, a little Israelite peasant boy, climbing a tree. And he's going there because he's hungry. He wants the eggs. Never mind how you get away with eating wild bird eggs, but it's apparently permissible. But the halacha, the Jewish law in this Torah portion is you've got to scare away the mother bird so that she shouldn't see that you're stealing her children. So he does that. He's hanging on to the branch with one arm. He's waving at the mother bird and chasing her away. But in the course of waving, he loses his grip, crashes to the ground, and he dies. And Elisha ben Avuya sees the same thing. Sees this happening. And he says, and this was a kid who died fulfilling a Torah mitzvah. And Elisha says, Ein din v'ein dayan. There is no judgment, there is no justice, there is no judge, which is a denial of God. He's kind of the first Jewish atheist. And after that, he stops being a rabbi. He becomes, all of his former comrades, colleagues in the Sanhedrin are forbidden to speak to him anymore. But what is significant is that particular mitzvah, the idea of waving away the mother bird, is still there. Okay, let's see. Are you allowed to turn in an escaped slave, the fugitive slave law of the 1840s? No, you are not. You have to assist that person in their escape. Now, if you have an ox that is shackled to a rotary mill, with which I'm totally familiar, being from New York City, if the ox is going round and round, and you notice the ox is eating some of the grain that it is grinding, are you supposed to punish the ox? No. You are allowed to eat on the job. So the next time you call a government office and the clerk answers with their mouth full of Twinkies, you'll say, oh, this is permissible according to the Torah, but it's not permissible according to me. Could you swallow that thing and whatever. Are you allowed to charge interest on a loan? And I would say more Jews suffered and died for this particular mitzvah than
It's not that out, but they find the way.
Well, you're not allowed to charge, this is what they said, don't charge interest to a Jew. But if they're not Jewish, then you can charge interest. And strangely and sadly, this put the Jews into the money lending business. Whether you're Shylock or Barabbas, the Jew of Malta, or the Rothschilds, I'll never forget years ago, this must have been the mid to late 60s, somebody decided, it was right after Fiddler, and Fiddler was like the Jewish musical of all time, and somebody said, hey, I know, let's make a musical about the Rothschilds. So they had singing and dancing moneylenders. They had romantic interest. It was the most bizarre thing. I did not buy the album. I suppose I ought to have bought the album. Well, but unfortunately, socially speaking, Jews were not considered people. Jews were seroi kamerai. They were the servants of the royal chamber. And in the case of Poland, you had the Jew in the middle, they were the tax collectors, the peasants, who were Russian Orthodox on the bottom, or Polish Orthodox, the nobles, the poyarim, the poritzim, the squires, who were Catholic, and they both hated the Jews. And what was the easiest way to get money if you were a drunken squire and you wanted to go to war with the squire in the next county? You kidnap the rabbi, you put him in prison, and you tell his people, I'm not going to let him go until you pay me X number of dollars, silver, gold coins, whatever. And what often happened was that, well, it didn't often happen, but there was one rabbi, I'm trying to remember who he was, he died in prison, and the squire would not release his body. Only years later, I assume they had him preserved, a wealthy Jew of the congregation paid the ransom, and they got the rabbi's corpse back. It's just kind of icky when you think about it. All right, let's finish up with something really fascinating, which I'm sure nobody here has ever witnessed, nor have I. Okay, let's say that, I don't know, Molly is married to Irving, okay? And then Irving dies, and they have not yet had male issue. And Irving has a brother, Sidney. Okay, what is Sidney supposed to do for Molly?
Marry.
Yes, indeed. Now, if Sidney, for some reason, doesn't want to marry her, there is a very elaborate ceremony. And in many Jewish museums, we have the equipment for this kind of thing, on the off chance that we might need to do it. The Orthodox still do it, okay? What happens is that Molly and Sidney, in front of a bet din, in front of a group of 3 rabbis, there's this very long, tall boot, and it's got a lot of laces and latches, and I keep thinking about a cross between the galoshes my mother made me wear, and with the clips, rather than a zipper. Later on I had a zipper, it was so revolutionary. And laces as well. She puts the boot on his foot, and then she goes to take it off. And while she's doing that, she spits on the floor in front of him and says, "Thus shall be done to the brother who does not wish to raise up the seed of his dead brother." And then she can marry anybody else. Any thoughts? Now, again, what is the central thrust of this particular mitzvah? You gotta have kids. I mean, for goodness sake. I will never forget, this is long before we moved down here, I saw this photograph from the newspaper, and it showed an exhausted-looking mother, 11 exhausted-looking girls in gradations of age, and then the not exhausted-looking young chassid holding his baby son. You see? Because what is the main mitzvah when you're having kids? 2 girls, 2 boys, boy, girl?
90 boys.
Well, yes, many boys is good, but you also have to throw a girl in there somewhere. Because in effect, you have to duplicate yourself. And in this instance, they were just pushing and pushing and pushing to have a boy, but they kept having girls. And I thought, wow, that is really unfortunate. Everybody says, oh, because the Orthodox have the highest birth rate, they're going to take over Judaism. I've found in my experience, after being a rabbi for 40 years, you really don't make predictions. You never know what's going to happen. Okay? All right, any thoughts? Shabbat Shalom, good Shabbos? Yes? Yes, sir.
What if the other brother that's alive is already married?
Polygamy is...
If that's
Polygamy rocks out. That's the way to go. You just buy, you make reservations for 3. Okay, I wouldn't try it myself, but I understand that it does have a history. Thank you very much. Shabbat Shalom. We're going to light candles. And would you honor us? Okay, thank you. All please rise. All the ladies kind of go in this direction. Oh, well, we'll do it together. After they're sorry. Okay, I don't mean to make trouble. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, we wave our hands over the candles, bringing Shabbat, cover our eyes and do the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu, le'hadlik ner shel Shabbat. Amen. Asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, b'mitzvotav. V'tzivanu le'hadlik ner. V'tzivanu le'hadlik ner. V'tzivanu le'hadlik ner. Shel Shabbat. Amen. Person next to you, wish them good Shabbos, good Shabbos. Thank you for coming.
Good Shabbos, good Shabbos.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shabbos.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat
Please be seated.
Shabbat Shalom. Umevorach. Shabbat Shalom. Umevorach. Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom.
Today I have got a special request. And that reminds me the joke about the Jew that wanted to be a Kohen, and he was given a lot of money to be a Kohen, and then they asked him, why do you want to be a Kohen? And he says, my father was a Kohen, my grandfather was a Kohen. So because the request today was
He's a Kohen.
to, yeah.
He only tells jokes about
But-
Kohanim.
Yeah. So the request today was to start the service in a traditional way, with Shalom Aleichem, that we never did. We always do. So that reminds me of the joke of the coin. So I'm going to start with the Shalom Aleichem, with the traditional tune.
13.
And you are going to sing with me, especially the person who asked me the Shalom Aleichem. Okay? 1, 2, 3. Shalom Aleichem, Malachei HaShalom, Malachei Elyon, Yimelech, Malachei HaMlachim, Kadosh Baruch Hu. Bohen Shalom, Malachei HaShalom, Malachei Elyon, Mimelech, Malachei HaMlachim, Kadosh Baruch Hu. Baruch Hu Shalom, Malachei HaShalom, Malachei Elyon, Mimelech, Malachei HaMlachim, Kadosh Baruch Hu. Sechem leShalom, Malachei HaShalom,
We're going to do page 15. I think we're going to be doing the bottom of the page.
The page
We're doing
19. We're gonna skip to Psalm 99. Sure.
Okay, the cantor is honoring me with a responsible reading.
And you have to honor him by reading the other part.
Yes, that's it, okay.
Don't expect me to read with you.
No,
With my broken English.
Beautiful.
Okay.
Okay, it's better than my Spanish. Okay, Adonai is sovereign, nations tremble. God is enthroned on high, the very earth quivers together.
Adonai is great in Zion, exalted over all peoples. Let them praise God, for God is awesome, holy.
The sovereign mighty rules with the love of justice. You alone bring about equity, ordaining justice and compassion for the people of Jacob.
Exalt Adonai our God, worship God who is holy.
Moses, Aaron, Samuel, God's chosen ones, called out to Adonai, who answered them in a pillar of cloud.
They zealously strove to obey the divine law, even when God's decrees were beyond their grasp.
You responded to them with compassion, even as you rebuked them for their offenses.
Extol Adonai and bow toward God's holy mountain. Adonai our God is holy.
3 last lines. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu ve'ishtachavu le'akosho. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu ve'ishtachavu le'akosho. Ki. Okay, this is the way. So, we say ki this side, and you are answering ki. So, ki. 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 Ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu romemo. Ki. 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 Ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu romemo. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu ve'ishtachavu le'achosho.
He means because. You exalt God because he's holy. Yes, yes. Okay.
Page number 21.
Because of the wonderful things.
You got that, huh?
Yeah, I guess. 21 for the Pompano.
Lejando dili krakala, penei shabbat mekabela. 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 Shahor v'zachor v'dibur echad, ish miyanu v'nei miyuchad, Adonai echad u'shemo echad, v'shemu v'diferet v'keilah. Lechad שבת לכבודך, כי מקור הברכה, מראש מקדם לסוכה, צומח ערב השבת תחילה. לך, לך, דודי, לך דודי לקראת כלה, בני שבת נקבלה, לך דודי לקראת כלה, בני שבת נקבלה.
Page 22, the fourth stanza. Please rise, face the door through which the Sabbath Queen will enter.
בואי בשלום עטרת מעלה, גם בשמחה ותורה, אורחנו למען סגולה, בואי חלה, בואי חלה. לך דודי דודי, לך דודי לקראת כלה, בני שבת נקבלה. דודי לקראת כלה, בני שבת נקבלה.
Please remain standing. Page 28 is the Baruch. Towards the ark.
Baruch Adonai Yamevorach.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Yamevorach. Le'olam Va'ed.
Amen.
Thank Mr. and Mrs. Simmons for opening the ark. We're going to make Shechayanu on this occasion, a special occasion. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam.
Yanu l'zman hazeh.
Amen. Blessed are you, Lord our God, who has kept us alive and sustained us and brought us to this happy time. We say Amen.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, אשר בדברו מרים הרבים ובחוכמה פותח שערים ובגבולה משנה עתים ומחריב את הזמנים ומסדר את הכוכבים במשמרותיהם ברקיע כרצונו בורא יום ולילה גולל אור מפני חושך וחושך מפני אור הוא מעביר יום ומביא לילה הוא מעביר Yom Adonai Tzevaot Shemo El Chai V'Kayam Tamid Yimloch Aleinu Le'olam Va'ed Yair Lalai Lai 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 Yalai Lalai Lai Lai Yair Lalai Lai Lai Baruch atah Adonai Amari Varavi.
All right, 29.
Avat Olam Beit Yisrael Amcha Ahavta Torah u'mitzvot u'kim u'mishpatim אותנו לימדת. על כן אדוני אלוהינו ושוכנו וקומנו להשגיח בחוקך נספק בדברי תורתך ובמצוותיך לעולם ועד. כי אין חיינו באורך ימינו באורך ימינו ובהם Adonai, Oev Amo Israel.
Page 30 is the Shema. We cover our eyes to show God cannot be seen. Shema
Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Uncover the eyes. Baruch Shem Kivod, Malchuto V'Olam V'Amed. And the English will read together, you shall love. You shall love Adonai your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. And these words which I command you this day you shall take to heart. Teach them diligently to your children. Recite them at home and away, night and day. Bind them as a sign upon your hand, and as a reminder above your eyes. Inscribe them upon the doorposts of your homes and upon your gates. We'll read silently to the end of the paragraph on 31.
למען תזכרו, ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי,
והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם, אני, אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם לאלוהים, אני, אדוני אלוהיכם. אדוני אלוהיכם אמת, אמת באמונה כל זאת וקיים עלינו, כי הוא אדוני אלוהינו, אין זולתו, מלכנו ישראל. מי כמוך בעיר אדוני, מי כמוך נהדר בקודש, נורא תהילות עוסק פלא, נורא תהילות עוסק פלא, יאללה 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 מלכותך ראו בניך, בוקע הים נבחי משה, זאלי אמרו ואמרו, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. ונאמר כי יעקב, יהלום יד חזק ממנו, ברוך אתה אדוני, גאל ישראל.
All right, on page 33, the top left-hand paragraph, as we customarily do, we'll go around, and if there's someone you know in need of Refu'ahShelemah, quick and speedy recovery, just mention their name. We'll all pray for them to have Refu'ahShelemah. Thinking about Laura Durant, Refu'ahShelemah. Thinking about our good friend Stuart Epstein, Refu'ahShelemah. And Adele Greenblatt, Refu'ahShelemah. And now our friend Rhoda Silverman, Refu'ahShelemah. So, anyway, anyone else? Okay, all right, Refu'ahShelemah. I think we'll start on the right-hand side tonight. Okay. No, we're good, we're really okay. Or we'll do the Hebrew way, from right to left. Okay, Refu'ahShelemah. Yes, Arnold,
Jerome Rada.
Refu'ahShelemah. Okay? Yes, okay. Right?
Lisa Saint,
Refu'ahShelemah.
Joel Kosnet,
Refu'ahShelemah.
Rudy Kosnet,
Refu'ahShelemah.
Arlene Carl.
Refu'ahShelemah.
Michelle J. Gomez,
Refu'ahShelemah.
Diana Dix,
Refu'ahShelemah.
Corey Kepler.
Refu'ahShelemah. Okay. Yes? Okay. All right.
John Staining.
Refu'ahShelemah. Okay. Yes, sir.
Myron,
Okay.
Myron Carl,
Refu'ahShelemah.
Sarah Tina Klein.
Refu'ahShelemah. All right, at this time we'll read together the English paragraph. Help us, Adonai. Help us, Adonai, to lie down in peace and awaken us again, our sovereign to life. Spread over us your from starvation, sword, and sorrow. Remove the evil forces that surround us. Shelter us in the shadow of your wings, O God, who watches over us and delivers us, our gracious and merciful ruler. Guard our coming and our going. Grant us light and peace now and always. Spread over us the shelter of your peace. Praise to you, Adonai, who spreads the shelter of peace over us, over all his people Israel, over Jerusalem and the entire world. Os Aleinu Sukkot Shlomecha, Baruch atah Adonai, Aborei Sukkot Shalom Aleinu v'al kol amo Yisrael, v'al Yerushalayim, v'al kol ha'olam kulo. Amen. On 34 is the V'shamra.
ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורות ברית עולם. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורות ברית עולם. ביני ובין בני ישראל אותי לעולם, אותי לעולם. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורות ברית עולם. כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורות ברית עולם. וביום השביעי שבת בי נפש, שבת בי נפש, שבת בי נפש. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורות ברית עולם.
Please rise, half Kaddish, bottom of 34.
יתגדל וגיד קדש שם רבה.
Amen.
ועלמא דיברה חירותי וימליך מלכותי. לך יקון יומייכון וחיי כל בית ישראל. בגלה ובזמן קריב אמרו אמן. יהי שמירה ונאורה לעולם ולעולמיה יתברך. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתעלה ויתעלה ויתעלה. שמי קודשם נהילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה ושבחתה 35b to 38, after which you may be seated.
Shalom, ki ata hu melech Adon, lechol shalom, shalom Avraham, al Yisrael amecha, tasim leolam, shalom Avraham, al Yisrael amecha, tasim leolam, tasim leolam, tasim
Page 48, the full copy.
אם גדל ויתגדל השם ברמה, יעלמה דברי כאילו ויבריך מלכות וחיי כל ויומי כל ובחיי כל בית ישראל Barau izmangani ve'imbro.
Amen.
Yegesh ve'irava mevorak. Vevol l'aurom me'omaya. Yidvarak ve'ishtabak ve'itpar v'idrom v'naseh. Ve'itadar v'idar shumen kodesha. Leila v'nikol v'rekata v'shirata. Tushbekata v'nikemata v'yamlarva ve'imbro.
Amen.
תתגבר אצל הדורות לכל ישראל, כמה מאוד משמעיה וגימברו. יגן שלום הרבה משמעיה, וחיים עלינו על כל ישראל וגימברו. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו, ועל כל ישראל, יכול יושב דבר, וגימברו.
All right, we have the Kiddush on page 49. Please rise as the Kiddush Macharim Rose about the potable.
Juice. Wine and nuts. Wine? Or juice? The juice or wine?
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, borech v'riach Amen. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher קידשנו במצוותיו, ורצה בנו, ושבת קודשו, ואהבה ורצון יגילנו. זיכרון למעשה ראשית, קריון תהילה למקראי קודש, זכר יציאת מצרים, קיבלנו בחרת, ואותנו קידשת, כי כל העמים בשבת קודשך, ויבואו רצון, הנחתנו, ברוך אתה אדוני, מקדש
Sholom, have sinful. All right, we're going to do the Aleinu. I'm going to ask our friend Avram and Jules. Jules, could you open the ark, please? Okay.
Break it in your hand.
Aleinu lechaveach v'adon hakol, ya'teinu lam yotzer b'shit, shelo asanu k'goi ha'arasot, ve'lo samanu k'mishpot ha'adama, shelo samchenu b'hem, ve'gol aleinu k'chol hamonam, אנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך שהוא נותן שמיים ויוצר הארץ ומשה מקרוב השמיים נמעל שכינתו סוף ושכינתו סוף בגובי מרומים הוא אלוהינו אינו אמת מלכנו ואפס זולתו ככתוב בתורתו אתה היום ואתה היום והשבות אל לבבך כי אדוני הוא אלוהים בשמיים
start. Thank you, gentlemen. A happy and a healthy New Year to you and yours. Okay. How's your arm? All right, we're going to ask you to please be seated. We're going to do the special psalm, page 80, for the High Holy Day season. Page 80.
לדוד אדוני יורי ואישי ממאירה, אדוני מאוד וחיי ממי אבכה.
Reading silent.
לולא האמנתי לראות בטוב אדוני בארץ חיים, קווה אל אדוני חזק ויאמץ ליבך וקווה אל אדוני.
All right, those saying Kaddish are asked to please rise on page 82. V'kadal v'kadash shemei rabbah.
Amen.
Yalmad yivrach yirutei v'yamlich machutei. V'chayechon v'mechon v'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael. V'agala u'bizman kariv v'yimru.
Amen.
Yehi
Shmei Rabbah Mevarach L'yadam Me'ayah.
Yitbarach, Yishtabach, Yitpa'ar, Yitromam, Yitnaseh, Yitadar, Yitaleh, Yitalal, Shemei, Yikudisha, B'riyahu, V'elam, and Kol, Birchata, V'shirata, Tushbechata, V'nechamata, V'amiran, V'alma, V'yimru,
Amen.
Yehesh, Lama, Rabba, Min Shemaya, V'chayim, Aleinu, V'al Kol Yisrael, V'yimru,
Amen.
Oseh, Shalom, B'mramah, Hu Yaseh, Shalom. Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'al kol yoshvei tevel, v'yimru.
Amen.
All right, please be seated. Thank you very much. Now we'll hear a few well-chosen words from our wonderful temple president, Rita Fleming-Klein.
I promise I'll choose them well. A very good Shabbos to everyone. It's good to see you, Avram. Good to see you, Mr. and Mrs. Sivan. Good to have you with us, Jules. It's wonderful to celebrate Shabbos with you. For those of you at home, for Laura, hello. For Howard and Roseanne Elecklin, hello. For Stuart Epstein and Shelley, hello. And for all of you who I don't know yet and who are at home watching this beautiful service, a sweet Shabbos to all of you. As the high holidays come closer, I know by looking at you, I sent out all of your tickets. So I know you have tickets. If you need tickets, call the office if you're having friends come or last minute company. We are filling up our beautiful sanctuary is going to be full and happy and looking forward to a wonderful New Year together. Tomorrow, after our more traditional service, Rabbi is going to hold his class, and it will be...
Yeah, I thought with the High Holy Days coming, we should think about the nature of human existence. We're going to swing back to philosophy. We're going to do existentialism, focusing on Sartre, and then we're going to end on a positive note with idealism, and we'll do, I think, George Berkeley. So.
I myself like a good shot of idealism, so please come to Rabbi's class. Come to his classes on Wednesday at 4:30 for the adult Hebrew class, and Wednesday at 7 o'clock for the current events class. Our wonderful, wonderful Spanish and Chips class with Cantor Javier is going on a short break until after the high holidays. Then we will resume. It's the most fun ever. And we do learn a lot, and we sing a lot, and we just have a wonderful time. I want to let you know that if you would like to include a loved one in the Book of Remembrance, this Wednesday is the closing date for us turning it in so that it will be ready for Yom Kippur. so if you would like to do that, please call the office. You know I'm in on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. A week from tomorrow, and Tuesday and Friday. This time of year, it's very busy. A week from tomorrow is Slichot. Come, be with us. We're going to have a wonderful evening together, and the changing of the covers on the Torah it's such a beautiful, beautiful service, and really gets us in the frame of mind for the holidays and for what it means. So please be with us. I want you to take the bulletins. I'll tell you why. It came out a little backwards this week. It opens in the Israeli way. But because our rabbi works so very hard on his essays every week, and they are phenomenal, we want you to be able to save them. And you can put little loose leaf holes in them and make a book, because I want Rabbi to include his stories in a book. I keep asking him to do that, but maybe by us doing that for him, we'll encourage him, because he works tremendously hard on these, and they are wonderful. They'll be included in your bulletin now every week as a separate item, printed correctly. So I wish you all a sweet Shabbos. Did I forget anything? No. Come join us for coffee and cake, and a sweet, good Shabbos to all of you.
Shabbat Shalom. So we are going to finish our service singing Adon Olam in a traditional way on page number 54. Adon Olam Hashem Adonai V'terem kol yitzir nivra Le'ez nasa v'etzor kol Azai melech shemo nikra Ve'acharei kidrot hakol Ma'ato yimlok nora Ve'hu haya ve'hu omer Ve'hu yiyeh v'tzifara Ve'hu echad u'ekad sheni Shelo le'achvira Ve'lireishit ve'litzachli Ve'lo ha'oz ve'hamizrah Ve'hu eli ve'chai b'ani Ve'zorrev li le'tzara Ve'hu nisri u'manosri Menachkosi ve'yoveka ve'ado ha'iburi Ve'yetishan ve'ayira Ve'yivruchi ve'riyati Adonai
Shalom, good Shabbos. Please rise for the closing benediction.
Yavarechecha Adonai ve'yishmerecha
The Lord bless you and keep you.
Yair Adonai panav elecha ve'yichunecha
The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious unto you.
Yisa Adonai panav elecha ve'yasem lecha shalom.
The Lord turn his face unto you and grant you peace. We'll say
Amen.
Amen. Shabbat shalom.
I am, yes. I'll make good Shabbos. Yes. How are you? I'm good, thank God. Yes.
There you go. You need to make sure you let yourself keep very.